The Giza Plateau is one of the most wondrous locations on Earth, and its otherworldly nature never fails to inspire awe. There is a sense that these ancient ruins originate from an entirely different planet, an entirely different reality. Although the Great Pyramids still pose many questions for archaeologists today, the Sphinx is laced with more mysteries than perhaps any other structure. In fact, the statue itself has become synonymous with riddles and the unknown. But what makes the Sphinx so mysterious? What questions are still left unanswered? What does mainstream science say about this statue? And why are Egyptologists so protective of it? Let's find out.
51 million people entering another
surveillance camera capturing the
unidentified flying object.
lockdowns and mass testing.
Today, that the world is going to end.
The Sphinx was always a strange structure, but until recently, we assumed that we had solved most of its riddles. Mainstream archaeologists were relatively certain that it dated back to 2500 BC, during the time of the pharaoh KHUFU. The official story is that it was created around the same time as the second pyramid at Giza, although archaeologists today admit that there's not a single inscription that connects the Sphinx with KHUFU. Dr. Robert Schoch has a much more compelling theory, and it's quite convincing. During the 90s, this geologist traveled to Egypt with Johnny Anthony West and examined the Sphinx. He immediately noticed that the Sphinx enclosure had clearly suffered water erosion. To Schoch, the implication was obvious. The water erosion was caused by significant flooding, a great deluge, if you will. But there's just one problem. There hasn't been flooding of that magnitude in Egypt for at least 5,000 years, suggesting that the Sphinx is actually much older than mainstream archaeologists believe. Dr. Robert Schoch has suggested that this flooding probably occurred at the end of the last ice age, which was about 12,000 years ago. Of course, this presents a major problem for the entire field of Egyptology, because according to most archaeologists, humans were still hunter-gatherers at this point in history. Even today, the accepted truth is that civilization began about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. If the Sphinx really is 12,000 years old, it means that our entire understanding of human history is wrong. Of course, critics dismissed Robert Schoch's work as pseudoscience, claiming that he couldn't possibly be right, even though the geological evidence was indisputable. Their theory was pretty straightforward. If humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers during this period, they couldn't have created megaliths like the Sphinx. In order to create these megaliths, humans must have had specialized trades and skills like stone masonry, and unless there is a food surplus, people cannot spend time learning these skills because they are preoccupied with hunting. In other words, the presence of megaliths like the Sphinx suggests that people were not hunter-gatherers 12,000 years ago. Instead, there was some kind of civilization with a food surplus and specialized trades. But this pushes the start date of human civilization back thousands of years, which essentially makes our entire understanding of prehistory incorrect. For academics who have spent their entire lives studying prehistory, such a drastic change is unthinkable, and so they instinctively deny the possibility. Göbekli Tepe is a subject for another video, but it is located not far from the Sphinx and has been also dated to about 12,000 years ago. This is yet another piece of evidence that points to a much earlier human civilization than we previously thought possible. The head of the Sphinx is the root of another puzzling mystery. Even if you have absolutely no experience with archaeology, it should be obvious that there's something not quite right about the head. First of all, it is far too small in comparison to the rest of the body. Some researchers have suggested that the Sphinx originally featured the head of a lion, specifically a lioness. This suggests that the statue predates the worship of pharaohs. In other words, the ancient Egyptians didn't build the Sphinx. They simply found it and recarved the head in order to make it fit with their own culture. Dr. Robert Schoch calls this ancient lion Mehit, which is the name of a protector goddess often tasked with guarding holy places. Mehit is often depicted as a reclining lioness, and she appeared throughout the early dynastic period. Dr. Schoch points out that the Sphinx also shows evidence of 3 ornamental collars on its neck. This matches descriptions of Mehit from various carvings. Critics of this theory say that the human head is the original, and it was kept small because they ran out of rock, or because they wanted to keep it stable. But this makes no sense. Not only was there more than enough rock in the area, but the Egyptians were master stonemasons who were more than capable of creating large stone features without compromising stability and overall integrity. In 1858, the inventory stele was discovered near the pyramid of Khufu. The stele contained detailed lists of various statues and monuments at Giza, and it states that the Khufu built a monument near the Sphinx. But this would mean that the Sphinx had already existed prior to the reigns of Khufu and Khafre, which means that it is much older than what mainstream archaeologists would have you to believe. There are other inscriptions dating back to the 4th dynasty that contain details about how certain pyramids were built. These inscriptions are extremely detailed, and they even tell us what the workers ate and how they were paid. With so many small, seemingly insignificant details, you might assume that the inscriptions would also mention the construction of the Sphinx, but there is no mention of it whatsoever in the inscriptions. Again, this suggests that the Sphinx was already in existence prior to even the earliest Egyptian dynastic periods. Many fringe Egyptologists believe that the monuments at Giza were intentionally designed to reflect the heavens. In other words, the people that created these structures lined them up perfectly with the stars. Robert BAUVAL was one of the first researchers to suggest a connection between the Great Pyramids and Orion's belt. It has also been suggested that the Nile River represents the Milky Way. But what about the Sphinx? BAUVAL claims that this age-old statue represents the constellation Leo. BAUVAL and Graham Hancock also believe that these stars provide an accurate time map that could provide clues as to when Giza monuments were constructed. Around 10,500 before Christ, we were in the astrological age of Leo according to the precession of the equinoxes, a fitting time to construct a statue honoring this constellation. In addition, the 3 stars of Orion's belt precisely matched the angle of the Great Pyramids in 10,500 BC. This might explain why the Sphinx was created in the first place, which is one of the oldest questions surrounding this monument. The entire Giza Plateau could be a star map of sorts that tells us exactly when these structures were built. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Sphinx is hidden beneath its paws. Legends as old as the statue itself speaks of underground chambers hidden below the ground. These legends persist to this day. In the 1990s, Robert Schoch conducted seismic studies at the base of the statue and discovered evidence that there were a number of cavities underneath it. Schoch then concluded that there might be a tunnel-like feature running along the length of the statue. In 2021, an Egyptologist used seismic topography to search for spaces or voids beneath the Sphinx. He also discovered a mysterious chamber approximately 5 meters below the statue. These discoveries essentially confirmed the long-standing rumors that there were hidden, subterranean chambers in the area, but mainstream Egyptologists mostly deny their existence. According to various rumors, these chambers may contain a number of important treasures. Some believe that the chambers contain a hall of records that date back to the time of Atlantis. These researchers believe that these writings could contain the secrets of alchemy, magic, and forgotten knowledge. Others believe that there is an entire underground city below the Giza Plateau. Still others claim that the Sphinx marks the entrance to a long passage that leads directly to the Great Pyramid. They also say that in ancient times, people were taken through this passage before being initiated into a secret society. If the Sphinx was indeed built by some distant civilization tens of thousands of years ago, almost all traces of that society have completely vanished. The only thing that is remotely close to this mysterious civilization is GOBEKLI TEPE. In fact, there are those that believe that the Sphinx is actually much, much older than even the most radical theories would suggest. Perhaps the Sphinx was always here on Earth. Maybe the statue and the Great Pyramid were here even before humans appeared on the planet. Perhaps these monuments are the last remnants of a star-faring civilization that spanned several planets. Maybe we were the interstellar civilization. The truth is that we simply don't know who built the Sphinx, and mainstream Egyptologists refuse to even consider anything that contradicts their narrative. Perhaps we will never truly uncover the mysteries of the Sphinx, but one thing is clear. The story of the Sphinx presents some unsettling implications. If there was an advanced civilization that created this stunning stone statue, it was wiped out by some kind of global cataclysm. The same event that would have wiped out the makers of Göbekli Tepe. The Sphinx reminds us that our civilizations are not permanent. One day, perhaps we will suffer the same fate, especially if we can't figure out what caused the last cataclysm. Maybe our cities will be destroyed or submerged underwater, never to be seen again. But something tells us that no matter what happens, the Sphinx will continue to stand watch over the Giza Plateau.